This is Andre Damon with the World Socialist website. I'm here with Niles Niemuth, the Socialist Equality Party's candidate for vice president, and we'll be speaking today on the question of police violence. Niles has just written a perspective, The Social Roots of Unrest in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, in which he deals with the class issues underlying the question of police violence and the struggle against it. So Niles, thank you very much for being here.
Thanks, Andrew.
So I just wanted to begin with a general overview of the situation in Milwaukee. Could you give us just an explanation of what happened over the course of the weekend?
Yeah, sure. Well, on Saturday there was a police killing. A black police officer who has yet to be identified killed a 23-year-old African-American man, Sybil Smith. There were protests in the Sherman Park neighborhood of the city. People gathered. The protests escalated. A number of buildings were burned. Cop cars were set on fire. And the police were mobilized. There were several dozen arrests. And then on Sunday, the National Guard was activated, has yet to be mobilized, at the request of the Milwaukee County Sheriff, David Clark, who is African American. He's also a prominent Donald Trump supporter. And there were further protests Sunday night and more arrests. Now there has been a curfew put in place at 10 p.m. Anyone under the age of 19 can't be out on the streets after 10 and can be arrested. There was a real eruption in the city of social anger. And once again, we've seen, police killing, which has sparked, massive protests in a significant major American city.
Well, you write in your perspective that, quote, while the killing of Smith is the immediate cause of the protests in Milwaukee, it is clear that broader issues are involved, bound up not with racial divisions, but a one-sided class war waged by the American ruling elite. What do you mean by that?
Yeah, well, I think that, this event has to be seen in the context of the social conditions which prevail in Milwaukee and the historical development of both deindustrialization and financialization. Milwaukee is a city which has been devastated by the closure of multiple industries and factories.
It's the second poorest large city in America.
It's the second poorest large city in America after Detroit. There's poverty is immense. I mean, we note in the perspective that, for the city as a whole, the poverty rate is twice the national average. For young people, it's more than 40%. This is a city where, everybody is either living in poverty or knows someone who's living in poverty. Unemployment is a major issue. These are the conditions that give rise to such anger.
Now, you have quite a bit of personal experience with this area. How does that, what can you tell us about it kind of from your own personal recollections?
Yeah, well, I lived in Milwaukee for 8 years. I went to school at the University of Wisconsin-Milwaukee. I studied African-American history and the history of African-Americans in Milwaukee, and I was an intern at the Wisconsin Black Historical Society, which is actually in Sherman Park. So I've actually been to the neighborhood. I've seen the conditions. It's absolutely one of the sort of poorest areas of the city. I think one of the things that has sort of come up again and again is that, it's a surprise that something like this didn't happen sooner. You see, abandoned storefronts and, you see all of the factories that were once running and now are closed. It's a surprise that, things like this don't happen more often.
But ultimately, I think it's significant. You just last week wrote a perspective on the report on police abuses in Baltimore. I mean, this is sort of a situation that's taking place throughout the country. On one hand, you have mass poverty, deindustrialization, mass joblessness, and at the same time, any expressions of opposition are cracked down by militarized police. Sort of the state of affairs in America.
Yeah, I mean, it's not just Milwaukee. It's everywhere. I mean, we've seen it time and time again. Really, and especially over the last 2 years, there's been a real a focus on it and a real anger that's been expressed. In Baltimore and Ferguson, in cities throughout this country, people have been protesting police killings, and that's these are conditions that everybody faces. It's not just Milwaukee.
Well, much of your article this week, yesterday, takes up the argument again that the police violence is purely a racial issue with no socioeconomic or kind of class underpinnings. Why do you think this narrative is being pushed so much? Because, of course, you open up any of the major newspapers, the New York Times most of all, turn on the TV news, it's presented as an issue, conflict between black communities and the police.
Yeah,
why is it being pushed so much?
It's very clear to us, in the work that we've done, that this racial narrative is being pushed to obscure the class issues. That there is a real effort to divide the working class. There's immense social anger, and there's a real effort to sort of distract people's attention away from the fact that these are problems, either the problem of poverty, of unemployment. Of police violence is rooted fundamentally in capitalism, of the inequality that's produced and enforced by the capitalist system. And so you have these, the commentators in the New York Times, middle-class protest movements like the Black Lives Matter, who are really pushing this racial narrative to both to distract, but also to their own benefit. That because they want positions, they want to be in positions of power, they want more money, and they can sort of use this racial narrative to push for that.
Well, I think that in this question, it raises the analysis of sort of the state and what are the police? The Engels said that the state is composed of bodies of armed men. I think we sort of develop on this analysis in a perspective, I believe, from last year by Joe Kishore, in which we write, amidst the social divide, the state, including the police, is not a neutral body but an instrument of class rule. Obama himself has encouraged and augmented the powers of the state at every turn, from the building up of a massive and unconstitutional spying apparatus to the declaration of the right to assassinate anyone, including U.S. citizens, without due process, the militarization of domestic police through the provision of billions of dollars in armored vehicles, weapons, and other equipment, a policy that the president endorsed yet again last week when this perspective was written. So do you think that, how could you comment a bit on that?
Yeah, well, I think there are multiple issues involved there. It's the Democrats who've been in control of the presidency for the last 7-8 years. Barack Obama has been the president. He's African American and hasn't made a difference for the vast majority of African Americans or anyone else in this country. The fact that we have a black president, I think sort of proves the point that it isn't fundamentally a racial issue. You can put, have any number of black officials, black police officers, black mayors, and yet the economic system is the same. It's the capitalist system, and people are being exploited. Mm-hmm. And you put people in those positions, and they're going to serve the role that they're intended to serve, to police inequality, to protect the interests of profit and the corporations. I think on the other hand, or at the same time, we've seen this massive militarization of the police. They're funneling, armored vehicles from Afghanistan to the police. They're giving them automatic weapons. They're, every time you see the police deployed, it looks like the military, if not more so. They're covered in body armor. They've got these massive guns. And that really speaks to the social tensions that exist in this country and the real social opposition to inequality. And they feel the need to really escalate the militarization of the police to sort of get a handle on that, to really control it.
Well, that gets to the next issue that I wanted to raise. This is obviously, is the quote that I just read points to, is bound up with the militarization of American society and the outbreak of war itself. I mean, I think one of the things that's characterized the growth of police violence and police killings in opposition to it over the course of the past few years is the fact that it's gone together with an escalation of U.S. military violence, whether, over the course of the past 5 years, the invasion of Libya, the bombing of Syria, confrontations with Russia over the question of the Ukraine. You have this constant buildup and militarization of society. And I guess how would you kind of relate the two between the police violence and militarism?
Well, I mean, there isn't a separation between the two. I mean, they go hand in hand. The United States ruling class wants to dominate the world, and they can't really dominate the world if they don't have a domination over the American working class. And so there is a real effort to suppress the working class here so that they can turn outward. And at the same time, they want to distract people and turn their attention elsewhere as well. They want people to be focused on, whoever the next enemy is, whoever the next Hitler is, whether it's Putin or, Gaddafi in Libya. They're always trying to promote these new wars to, one, to distract people, and also, two, to sort of justify these military operations.
Well, I think the fact that there's these continuous demonstrations really over the course of now 2.5 years, I think points to the enormous opposition and social grievances that exists in American society, which don't find any reflection in the politics of the two big business parties. How would you sort of relate the campaign overall to that opposition?
Well, I mean, the U.S. election campaigns, I mean, you have, two right-wing candidates. I mean, on the one hand, you have the Republicans and Trump, who are running as the party and candidate of law and order. They're pushing, legislation that would make it a crime to oppose police violence. And then you have Clinton, you saw at the DNC several weeks ago, they won, they hailed the police, they talk about how much they love the police, but then they also, they bring out the mothers of the victims of police violence, and they sort of cynically and hypocritically pose as the opponents of police violence. But, who is Hillary Clinton, and what are her policies going to be? She's going to continue the policies of Obama, which have been to militarize the police, as we talked about, and to cover up for police violence. I mean, under the Obama administration, they've done everything in their power to, prevent the prosecutions of these murderous police. And that's what the Democrats promise to continue.
Well, I just wanted to note that we will be taking comments from the online discussion from Facebook. If our viewers have any questions for Niles, if you could feel free to leave a note in the comments. I did have another follow-up question. In our writing, both on the question of police violence and really on every issue, we've sought to present this question of the unity of the working class. Obviously, it takes the form in our international coverage of the unity of the working class across national boundaries. On the question of police violence and sort of the attempts to whip up racial antagonisms, we've really stressed the question of unifying all sections of the working class, and that's certainly an element of our campaign, of our program. Could you speak a bit about that?
Yeah, well, police violence is something that affects everyone, regardless of their race. I mean, we've noted time and time again that the largest number of people that are killed by the police every year are white. It's not fundamentally a racial issue; it's an issue affecting the working class. I mean, that's what is the common factor in all of these police killings. More than 1,000 every year, more than 3 every day, and it's the fact that these people who are being killed, they're working class, they're poor, and that sort of, as we talked about earlier, there is an attempt to sort of push this racial narrative, and really sort of distracts from these fundamental class questions. Addressing the question of police violence isn't just a question of addressing racism. Certainly racism plays a role. I mean, it's a fact that, black people are killed disproportionate to their number in the population, but it's fundamentally a class question. I mean, what are the police? What do they represent? There's no amount of reform or oversight that's going to change the fundamental character of the police. They're an armed body of men who are there to protect the interests of the elite, of the capitalists, and that's what they're there for, to enforce those interests. They don't serve and protect the working class. They serve and protect the ruling class.
Was there anything else that you'd like to say about this topic?
I don't know. I mean, are there any other points you wanted to make, or?
Those are basically it for my questions. We don't have any additional questions for online, so I think we could probably wrap this up. I thought it was a very interesting interview. Thank you very much, Niles.
All right. Yeah. Thanks, Andrew.